away my sin. Nothing but the blood of Jesus. What can make me whole again? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. What can wash away my sin? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. What can make me whole again? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. What can wash away my sins? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. What can make me whole again? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Oh, precious is the flow that makes me white as snow. Fount I know, nothing but the blood of Jesus. What can wash away my sin? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. What can make me whole again? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Oh, precious is the flowing that makes me white as snow. Fount I know, nothing but the blood of Jesus. Oh, precious is the flowing that makes me white as snow. No other fount I know, nothing but the blood of Jesus. It's nothing but the blood. It's nothing but the blood. It's nothing but the blood. It's nothing but the blood of Jesus.
All right, well, hi friends. I am glad to be sharing with you once again. And again, I can't state enough. It's an absolutely crazy time we're in. We're all figuring it out day by day, step by step. No one's been here before, young and old. No one's faced something quite like this. And so whatever your reaction is, whatever you're feeling, it's probably reasonable. It's probably, obviously we are trying our best to be the best in this situation, but it's okay to feel all the things you're feeling because no one's been here before and we're all facing it together. But, despite the uniqueness of our times and the uniqueness of our situation, it's interesting to see that the Bible is actually full of stories of what happens when we face defeat, when we face loss, grief, failure, and what God teaches us in those moments, what God promises us in those moments, and how it is that we move forward, right? And so I was really encouraged this morning because I was reading from Isaiah 61, and just to give a little backstory, the Hebrew people, the Israelites, have just been hammered throughout the Old Testament with failure after failure, with being conquered, with setting up their own kingdoms and then having terrible leaders, with disease, just being slaves, just you name it. Their story is not one of just winning and being successful all the time. It's quite the opposite. But yet God teaches them so much through this time. God is faithful to them. And, later on in the Old Testament, we have these prophets that come up, and essentially they both bring warning, but they also bring encouragement. And in times where Israel has faced some of its most bitter defeats, these prophets come up and they basically say, look ahead. There's hope. There is a future. There is restoration where you've seen just destruction, right? And so in Isaiah 61, verse 3, and they talk about Zion. You can replace that with your hometown, right? You can replace that with the U.S. You can replace that with just this situation of coronavirus right now. But it says, as for those who grieve over Zion, or again, you can say, as for those who are grieving over the things happening in Washington, the things happening in the United States, for those who are grieving over the things happening in the world, for those who are grieving over just this virus and what it's causing, for those who are grieving over the economic loss, for those who are grieving over all these different things. And the prophet Isaiah says, God has sent me to give them a beautiful crown in exchange for ashes. So something of royalty, basically, in exchange for the destruction. To anoint them with gladness instead of sorrow. To wrap them in victory, joy, and praise instead of depression and sadness. People will call them magnificent, like great towering trees. I want to be like a tree. I don't mind that. I'd like to be like a towering tree. Standing for what is right, they stand to the glory of the eternal one who planted them. I love this a lot because, I look at some of these words. Gladness instead of sorrow. I think a lot of us are feeling sorrow. Victory, joy, and praise instead of depression and sadness. And it says he'll wrap them in these things. So he's saying your reality, though right now might be depression, sadness, grief, fear, loss, confusion, I'm going to wrap you, not just give you, but wrap you, encircle you, remake your reality to be joy, hope, victory. And that's just an awesome promise that we have. So I could just stop there, but I'm not going to stop there because it's too short. So, but it's just, again, remember that this is not only a difficult moment for God's people in this story, but this is a situation that they've been in time and time again, right? And, it probably for them at a certain point might have felt like, are we destined to repeat this pattern for the rest of our lives? Are we stuck facing defeat all our lives for all of history? And in the same way, do you ever go through a situation, experience pain, loss, confusion, and sometimes the first emotion to come up is this feeling that this is our new reality. This is what our life is going to be now. That basically whatever is broken right now is unfixable. That whatever we've lost, you cannot get it back. I know I feel that whenever just something that I was not expecting to happen happens in my life, whenever my life is disrupted, I think I panic a lot of times, and it's easy just to feel like, man, there's no coming back from this, right? And especially, not only is it that we're not going to get back to where we were, but we're not going to find something even better, right? And it's easy to apply that to our situation right now. Like, we're facing a lot of challenges, maybe challenges that we don't even know are still to come. And you might feel like, man, I don't know if I can see us getting back to normal, let alone see us getting back to a place that's better than what we had before. That just seems too far off. That just seems unrealistic. But what's interesting about this verse, about this promise, it's not that God promises that you'll never go through pain, that you'll never go through defeat, that you'll never go through heartbreak. But he promises that he will restore, that he will renew, that whatever emotion you're feeling, that he will wrap and return it to something that's even better than what we had before. That where we had defeat, we will experience victory. So here we are in this time where we're looking at Jesus' death and his resurrection. And as Christians, this is, the crucial story that our way of living in the world is really built on. That the way we understand not only Jesus' death, but his resurrection has everything to do with how we live our lives, with how we face trials, with how we overcome trials. And so when we're talking about this promise that not only is God going to bring us through these moments, but he's going to restore and resurrect things in our lives beyond what we had ever known before, we see in Jesus a real embodiment and fulfillment of that promise. See, Jesus comes and he leads this incredible movement, and he has his disciples and he has his team, and he is really gearing up to change everything, to change the world. He's changing it in his hometown, and he's teaching his disciples how to go forth and bring that change, bring that new vision of life to the world. And basically, for a lot of the disciples, without expecting it, without realizing what was going on, within 1 week and really a couple of days, their entire story is flipped upside down. Their entire way of moving through the world is flipped upside down, and Jesus is arrested and killed. And for those guys and gals, we talk about the 12 disciples, but there was a whole group of people following him. And it was actually women, the Marys, who were the first ones to see his resurrected self. But I'm getting ahead of myself. But for those guys and gals, for all of those who were following Jesus, when Jesus died, none of them understood what was to come. And so Jesus' death was this massive blow, this massive defeat, this huge loss, this sense of unknowing. I think right now we can all relate to that feeling of just a massive blow that we were not expecting, that we saw things going one way and all of a sudden, boom, things went another way, and we're just like, what is going on right now? But even though they didn't understand what was to come, even though they were in ashes, like the verse in Isaiah says, they didn't realize that there were crowns coming, that there was beauty coming. So you have Friday, Good Friday, this day of loss, this day of unknowing, this day where the sacrifice is made. And in the spiritual realm, that's a day of victory, right? That's a day where, as we understand it, Jesus really, in the act of giving himself on the cross, has won the victory right then and there, right? But in the human realm, as his disciples understood it, it was a moment of loss. So then you have Friday, and then you have Saturday, right? And Saturday is a really interesting day, because Saturday is a day where they have to sit in unknowing. They have to sit in that feeling of loss, of pain, and of not knowing really what to do next. And I feel like quarantine sometimes feels like Saturday, if you know what I mean. Not like Saturday in a good way, like a weekend Saturday. Saturday is like the best day in our world, right? But in the terms of the Holy Week, Saturday is an interesting, solemn, quiet, somber affair. And I feel like, that's what quarantine maybe has started to feel like for some of us. And, what's really interesting is that Saturday is right on the cusp of Sunday. It's like we talk about, the night is darkest before the dawn. And you don't get Sunday without Saturday. You don't get it without Friday, but you can't skip Friday and Sunday. I mean, you can't skip from Friday to Sunday, right? It just doesn't work. And so what we see in this cycle that Jesus' death and resurrection shows us is that we go from a loss, we go from ashes, and then we just have to sit with that for a little bit. But then Sunday always comes. And what do we know? That Sunday means resurrection. Sunday means new life. Sunday means new hope. Sunday means the light at the end of the tunnel is here. Sunday means we not only have made it through the darkest times and the challenges, but things are even more filled with hope than we could have imagined. And that's what we see in the Jesus story. Because something that really occurred to me is that Jesus didn't resurrect and then just keep on with business as normal. Jesus didn't just die and then come back as his same human self and go, all right, let's keep on going. We have more towns to hit, and see what's up. No, Jesus, in his death and in his resurrection, actually returned in a form that was greater, more filled with hope, and more filled with promise than his disciples could have ever imagined, because their minds were only able to conceive a Jesus who was leading their movement in person. But when Jesus resurrects, not only does he come back to empower them to now lead this movement, but he says, I've given you my spirit. I'm always with you. I'm not just physically here to lead you as a man. I am now spirit. I have ascended. You can go every direction and I will be with you. It's more than you could have possibly imagined. That your entire way that you assumed this was going to go, that you assumed that our movement was going to play out in the world, it's now bigger, more expansive than you can possibly imagine, right? So he comes back and he completely breaks their whole way of thinking about things, and he gives them a new normal that is better than they could have possibly imagined. And certainly here are we in these difficult times, wondering what our new normal is going to be like after all this. But again, we come back to Isaiah 61. I'll bring you victory, gladness where there was sorrow, where there was pain, right? And we really see that not only are we promised that things will be restored, but we're promised a new normal that's going to be better than anything we could have imagined. And I'm not sitting here, or walking here rather, saying, look, things are just all of a sudden gonna, just turn around and be back to normal and amazing in no time or whatever. I don't know. But what I am saying is that we have an opportunity in these times, not only just to get back to life as usual, but actually, in a way, resurrect the way we thought about our lives. Let some of those old habits die, just like Jesus allowed himself to die in order to get to that resurrection. That we can allow some of the things that we don't need, we can let those things go, and we can move forward and resurrect to a better life than we knew before. And here's basically the practical way that I see that happening. When all of us were hit with quarantine, or just this situation of confusion and unknowing, I think for a lot of us, both some of our best and our worst came out, right? Some of our worst habits came out, because how else do you get through quarantine sometimes but just relying on your worst habits? I mean, I know for me, I've watched more TV and been on my phone more than I ever have, because it's just an easy fix, right? It's an easy way to feel better sometimes when you just don't know what to do. But this has taught me, it's shown me that there are habits in my life that aren't really helping. I'm not saying never watch TV or never use your phone, but quarantine has actually showed me, am I turning to things that aren't really doing me any good? And so the thought is what if we can use this time to really see what comes out, what is helpful to us, what isn't helpful to us, and then can we simply let go of the things that aren't helpful to us in this time, really grow the things that are helpful to us. If for you, you're reading your Bible more, or you're praying more, or you're spending more time with your family, that's really intentional time, not phone time. Those are the things that we need to grow, we need to plant, we need to water. And the things that aren't working, aren't helping, we can let those things go. And in that way, at the end of all this, we're going to be a people who have seen some stuff, for sure, who have been through challenges together, for sure. And so it doesn't mean that we go back to, exactly the way things were. But in our maturity, in that development and growth that has come through that challenge, we actually can see a better version of ourselves, a version that essentially has resurrected to a new way of living, a new reality. And so for me, what I'm just challenging myself to do is, can I look at the things in myself, just like Jesus put himself on the cross, essentially laid himself on the altar. What are things in my life that I can lay on the altar, that I can let be ashes? And if I can do that, if you can do that, then out of it, it's very likely that we can resurrect, bloom, grow, restart with new perspective on everything, and we can have a whole new way of living from here on out. And I know for many of us, this has really forced us to take stock of what's important in our lives, and I think that we can live with those values, not just now, but moving forward. Even after this is done, all the good things that we learned about ourselves, about what's important to us, we get to take that with us and move forward. And so through all this, we get to level up still. And so I just want to encourage you, would you work towards that level up? You guys are awesome. I love you.